words AI, you know, are worrisome. And the worry in that, of course, is the worry about, my identity, what is myself, who's the authentic self, and how do I feel about a clone running around and who might want to say all kinds of things which I never would say.
Today we're speaking with Gurcharan Das. His latest project is an AI-assisted version of the Gita, which he is doing for the New York publisher Rebind.ai. Now, Gurcharan, would you like to tell us about these projects?
I gather that they're going to interview me for 10 to 15 hours. And then they will clone my voice from those interviews. And they will create an interactive book for the reader who can pause at any time and ask a question, and they'll get an answer from the clone of my voice. And at the end of every chapter, there'll be a discussion. They'll encourage a discussion between the reader and myself about what the reader has read and what questions the reader may want to have. And similarly, at the beginning of every chapter, I'll give the reader an introduction. And this can be, the reader can read that introduction, or the reader can hear it. And so idea is an interactive book. So there's fascination and horror. That's my response to this project. I actually refused them beginning, saying that, look, I am not a Gita scholar. There are hundreds of Gita scholars. I'm neither a guru. There are thousands of gurus talking about the Gita every day. So I told them I could suggest to use some names. But they gave me an answer that kind of floored me. They said that you wrote a book called The Difficulty of Book, Good on the Mahabharata and Dharma. And that book brought the Mahabharata into the 21st century. Now we want you to do the same. The gurus, etc., might take us back to the wonder that was India. No, we don't want to go back. We want you to bring the Gita here and now and today and tell us, what does it mean to our lives as we face these issues of technology, of AI and wars and so on. So that is really partly the project. But I thought, if I'm going to spend so much time going into the Gita verse by verse, and yes, I did. I mean, I do know Sanskrit because, in fact, I learned it at Harvard, of all places. There was a man called Ingalls who was a great teacher. And he was the one who was the greatest scholar of his time. Anyway, I was lucky enough to do that. And so I have access to Sanskrit, but certainly not a Sanskrit scholar. However, what this does do, Pratik, is it gives me a chance to broaden the question. A lot of people today keep asking, and particularly with the kind of government we have in control today, a nationalist government that's in power, I think the question in every way is really the idea of India. What are the ideas that have shaped India? And Gita is a very good entry point to talking about the Indian way. Just for example, the fact that the Gita, the holiest book in the eyes of most Indians, most Hindus, gives you three ways. I mean, most religions give you, here's the answer. Gita says, well, there's the way of knowledge, which you can achieve through thought and meditation. There's the way of action, which you can achieve in your everyday life, in how you act every day. And there's the way of love, and which is something we're also familiar, devotion. So the fact this just the plurality is very much a function of the Indian way. And you know, the very charming thing at the end of the Gita, Pratik, is Krishna, in the second to last verse, I think, he tells Arjun, now look, I've told you all that I know. Now you decide what you want to do. Again, that brings up the whole, the Indian habit of discussion of our, that's why we are called an argumentative Indian, which was the title of a wonderful book by Amartya Sen. And so we have in us a speculative streak, and this, it begins in the Rig Veda, the most ancient, in some ways, the holiest of the Vedas, 1500 BC. And they're discussing at that, in chapter 10, how was the cosmos created? And well, they're confused, it was dark, there was no being. And so one person says, well, maybe we should ask the gods. But the gods came later, says the other side. How would they know? Oh, maybe we should ask the Brahmins. Oh, but Brahmins are always arguing with each other. We'll just get confused. So they go back and forth, arguing like this, until they decide, well, maybe we don't know how the cosmos was created, and maybe we'll never know. Now that speculative thought defines the Indian temper, which I think of as a basically intellectually, mentally a liberal temper.
And your own book, how is it on the Gita? How is it going to be different?
Well, I'm also writing another book, a book of essays, and these will take the Gita out of just an chapter by chapter reading of the Gita to bigger issues that in my mind and over the years that I've been thinking about, such as, if you think about Arjun's moral dilemma, there, the dramatic setting in the beginning of the Gita, where the armies are arrayed, ready to do battle, and suddenly Arjuna, the Pandava general, suddenly gets cold feet and says, I don't want to fight. I don't want to kill my people. I don't want to kill people I played ball with when I was young. And so this raises the questions. What if the Buddha had been the charioteer rather than Krishna? It was after all Krishna, the God, who gave him advice to go and fight. Well, the Buddha would not have given him that advice. And who was right? Because it's a moral dilemma. Arjuna there are two notions of dharma involved. Swadharma, which is the dharma of the warrior, of the Kshatriya, that Krishna appeals to. But the Mahabharata also talks about Sadharan Dharma, which is dharma of every human being, such as ahimsa, not to kill, satya, to be honest. These are virtues of all human beings. And so it's a dilemma within the Mahabharata, within the Gita as well. And so these sort of things interest me, because we've got this Ukraine war, you've got the Gaza war happening. All these are just terrible things to read about. And even this India-Pakistan business of 3 days, thank God it ended in 3 days. And now they're talking about, oh, who won? What happened? Who cares? The war came to an end. And so what I'm saying is these are very much alive today. And Pratik, in my view, there are two kinds of nationalisms. There's the good nationalism, which is this, for example, my memories of the stories my grandmother told me from the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and the epics. It's my growing up in the Himalayas, going to school, and the lovely weather and the mountains and the geography of the country that I remember. That's what I think of. Oh, and I cheer the Indian cricket team invariably, and that's also my idea of good nationalism. But bad nationalism is about power. It's about feeling superior to others. It's about creating an other. It's about finding a scapegoat to hate. And that's that 19th century narrow nationalism, which is what I am afraid that today is becoming. We thought was discredited after the loss, after the Allies defeated the fascists in the Second World War. But it's reared its ugly head again all over. I mean, not just in India, but all over. And so this is a good time to write a book about things like identity. I mean, frankly, I also sometimes ask myself, why should my loyalties stop? Why should my circle of concern stop at the borders, that horizon of concern at the border of my country? I feel I live in the world, and certainly as a classical liberal, I was a votary of globalization, which was trying to kind of make us one world. Anyway, that's taken a big hit.
In the course of your career, you had several, shall we say, course corrections, and each of these must have involved a dilemma of some kind, from academia to corporate life to literature, the life of an essay writer. How did you negotiate these?
Well, the story begins, Pratik, and it's fresh in my mind because I've recently written a memoir called Another Sort of Freedom. And in that book, I talk about an incident that occurred. One of my earliest memories is when I was in kindergarten in Lahore in 1947, March 47. I'm coming home from school, running home with a report card, a green report card that I'm sporting in my hand. My mother is waiting at the door and she sees me coming and she says, did you stand first? And my father is nearby. And my father says to her, that was the wrong question. And he explains that you should be asking him what he likes about school, what he doesn't like about school, what does he like to draw, does he like to tell stories. And very early at that point, I was made aware of two powerful influences in my life. The first was my mother's, who was concerned with my making a living one day. And she was concerned that I'd be getting good grades and I should go from good school to a good college to a good job. And my father, who was more relaxed, he was an engineer during the weekdays, but he was a mystic during the weekends. He meditated every day and he had a bigger view. And he used to talk, my mother used to talk about making a living, and he used to talk about, yes, making a living, but also making a life. So this making a life versus making a living became a refrain of my life. And so, I mean, let's jump from when I was 5 years old to when I'm 17, and I've got this unbelievable good luck of getting a scholarship to Harvard. And my mother is saying goodbye to me at the Palam airport in Delhi as the Air India flight is about to take off. And between tears in her eyes, she's saying, now you better study something useful at Harvard. Why don't you be an engineer like your father? And so I arrive at Harvard and dutifully I go to the dean's office and I write down in the card my major, engineering. But I have a roommate who is studying Russian literature and he's reading Anna Karenina. And one day at lunch, he says to me, Gurcharan, if you're going to have an affair with a married woman one day, it should be someone like Anna Karenina. And then he goes on to catalog the virtues of Anna Karenina. And I'm thinking something is wrong here. Here I am mugging up Bernoulli's equations and calculating pipe friction. And this guy's dreaming of sleeping with Anna Karenina. So I go charging off to the dean's office and I say, I want to change my major. I cross out engineering and I write just liberal arts. They allow you to do that in an American undergraduate education. For the first 2 years, you don't have to have a particular subject. And so I start reading in my next semester Greek tragedy, Roman history. I study economics, politics, philosophy. I read Plato's dialogues. I even take a course in Sanskrit love poetry. And when my mother hears that I'm studying Sanskrit at Harvard, she practically falls off her chair. And she says, hi, mera munda. And basically saying a dead language, only the dead are going to give him a job one day. Anyway, I end up graduating in philosophy and I get another scholarship to go to Oxford to do my PhD. And during that summer, I'm home in Chandigarh in a park one evening, looking at the sky and asking myself, do I really want to spend the rest of my life at that stratosphere of abstract thought? No. I want a life of action. Now, I have no clue what a life of action is, but I quietly write off to Oxford to say I'm not coming, and thank you very much. And we have a nosy neighbor at home where we live in Chandigarh, who comes and visits to have coffee with my mother. And she invariably asks her, "And what is your son doing? Thoda munda ki kar rahe?" And my mother gets embarrassed. And each time I see this embarrassment on her face, and I said, "Look, I can't do this to her. I've got to get a job." And so I answer the first ad in the paper, and it's from a company that makes Vicks Vapor Rub, and they want trainees. And I have no clue what business is all about because I have graduated in philosophy. But I guess they get impressed with my Harvard degree or something and give me the job. And so that was one turning point where really my father had to explain to my mother at that time, when I was studying Sanskrit and I was studying Greek tragedy and all that. He explained to her that he's making a life with books. And he kind of reassured her that he will always be able to make a living, don't worry. But so I get a job, and suddenly I'm transported from the ivy-covered halls at Harvard to the dusty bazaars of India, going from chemist shop to chemist shop, telling the chemist, "One free on 1 dozen today. How many dozens can I send you?" So it's a bizarre change in life, but there it is. But I kind of like the rough and tumble of the business life. I of course, it was limited, and that's why I also, in my 20s, I became, on my father's advice, I was bored at work, and he said, "You have the weekend. Why don't you do something different that you like to do?" And so at the age of 22, one Sunday morning, I sat down to write a play. And I told myself, to give myself josh, I said, it must have been a morning like this when Shakespeare too sat down to write Hamlet. Now, a sane person doesn't say that, but I wasn't quite sane. Anyway, that play did well. It was performed, it won a prize, it was done at the Edinburgh Festival on BBC. And then I had a second play, which was done off-Broadway, a play on Mirabai, the Rajput saint, and the director from La Mama set it to rock music, which was amazing. It was actually the best production, Meera Bhajans, in that passionate hard rock music. Anyway, I had a second life, which I continued wearing as two hats for the next 25 years or more. But then, like anyone, who reaches in your 40s particularly, you ask yourself, is this what life was all about? And this question I asked when I was actually based at the headquarters of Procter & Gamble. That Vicks company had been bought over worldwide by P&G, Procter & Gamble. And I had then become the head of the company, the CEO of Procter & Gamble India. But they had sent me to world headquarters to groom me for higher responsibility. But the question in my mind was, how long can an adult spend his life selling Tide detergent, Vicks Vapor Rub, Oil of Olay, Pantene shampoo, Head and Shoulders, all Gillette blades, all good brands, mind you, good, but there was a big world outside. And so I quit at 50. And so that was another turning point. And I said, by then, because I'd been a weekend writer for 25 years, I'd written plays, I'd written a novel, all of them did well. They're still selling and they're being performed. And so I had the confidence to become a writer.
Now, your book, India Unbound, was about that very interesting period in which reforms kicked in. What do you think about India's prospects at present, now that it faces a trade war and is accused of protectionism on a scale which probably doesn't exist?
Right. So this is good. So the columns I began writing and the thinking that I began doing and the traveling I did, that resulted in this book, India Unbound, which was the first book to project the economic rise of India. And at that time, half the people thought I must be smoking when I predicted that. But, to be very honest and I can humbly confess that India has risen. India is obliged by rising. And what do I mean by that? Well, one, the economic growth rate before the reforms was 3 to 3.5%. In the last 30 years after the reforms, it has been 6.5%. We've had a green revolution, which of course began earlier, even before, in the 60s actually. But we've skipped almost let me just complete the thought though. We have lifted 450 million people out of poverty in these 30 years. 30 years, 91, yes, almost 25, 30 years. Middle class has grown from about 10% to about 30%. And poverty, which was around 50%, is now, by the same measures, the latest World Bank report shows that poverty in India is below 5% by the same measure, by the same yardstick, what we call the Tendulkar poverty line. So we've done well. We've come a long way. We've had an IT revolution, but there's been one serious flaw in our model, and that is that we have not been able to create enough jobs. And the reason is that we have not created an industrial revolution. Every country that went from poverty to prosperity went from agriculture to manufacturing to IT services. We seem to have skipped the manufacturing stage, and manufacturing today is less than 15% of GDP, employs less than 11% of the people, and manufactured exports from India account for 2% of global exports. That is the measure of our failure. And there are many reasons for it. I won't go into that because that will get us into another area. But the fact of the matter is that it's not too late to do it. And in fact, conditions today are far better to achieve that. Now, we still have to do reforms. Our tariffs were still too high. So Mr. Trump was right in wanting us to bring down tariffs. He, in fact, was doing us a favor because he's making us do what's good for us to join the global value chains in the world. But the fact is, today, 45% of India's working people are on the farm, and half of them are redundant. We need less than half of those people. And so the only route for them is industry and manufacturing. And as I said, it's not too late, because I think AI is first going to hurt the white collar jobs before it massively obsoletes the factory job. So we can still go through the factory stage in India. And we have a very good, I mean, for example, road, infrastructure in India has improved dramatically. Road mileage has doubled since 2011. Port handling capacity has quadrupled. Logistics are 40% better. We've had a digital revolution, which has taken away a lot of friction out of transactions. And we have got one, what is called the GST, which has made us one country, the goods and services tax, which has replaced 29 sales taxes that existed in the country. So it's become much, much, much better. But yes, we still have to do the reforms. And that requires political will. And it's not easy in a democracy to do those reforms. And I mentioned one was tariffs, but labor reform, land reform, and so on. However, these can be done, and countries have done that. And we have to become basically competitive. But when I say we can join, the real jobs will come. And the way forward has been shown by Apple, the iPhone. India in the last quarter made more iPhones than China. And 2 years ago, 100% of the iPhones were made in China. But Apple said that, look, we've got to diversify. There are problems happening in China. And so a lot of the multinational companies are feeling the same sort of nervousness, anxiety about China. And so they made the decision to come to India. Just the first year, 15% of the production led to 150,000 jobs in the state of Tamil Nadu, where they put their where the factory are of these phones. They're contract manufacturers, by the way, Apple is not making them. But 150,000 jobs, of which 70% of the jobs are women. And most of the women came from the villages around there. And within 2 months, they became trained to do the precision job of an iPhone assembly. Each job created 4 indirect jobs. So 600,000 jobs were created just in the first year. I'm talking not, and now when the production is on the way to doubling, depending on what happens with Mr. Trump's tariffs, of course. What I'm saying is Apple has shown how India can do it. If I were in India's shoes, every chief minister, every state who complains he's not getting enough foreign investment, etc., I would go to, what Vietnam's prime minister did when he heard that they had lost the iPhone to India? He got on a flight and flew to Cupertino, California. And he went and met the CEO of Apple. And he said, look, we've lost the iPhone to India. Will you give us the tablet? Will you give us the iPad? And he got it. Now that's how you behave. That's what China has shown, that you really have to go and make and be welcoming for foreign investment, and you have to woo. So I would go to all the major consumer brands. Most of them are labor intensive manufacturing, whether it's Nike shoes or Zara clothes or whatever. I mean, I would go, and that's what could be done. Unfortunately, as you pointed out, Mr. Trump has thrown a spanner in the works, because nobody knows what's happening and what's going to happen. And so, but I think things will settle down. A lot of this is negotiation tactics, his threat of 50% tariffs. I just hope it will not be realized, because it will ultimately, these high tariffs are going to hurt the American consumer, and it will hurt Mr. Trump in the end. So that is, you asked me, I've just given you India Unbound 2, where we are. And frankly, today, India is the fastest growing major economy in the world, growing at around 6.5%. I think if we can raise this up to 7%, even 7.5%, that should be our objective. And take some of the politics out. And I think Mr. Modi and the government should learn to handle the opposition. The opposition, you have to sell your ideas, as Margaret Thatcher taught us. But more than economic reforms, Pratik, I think we need reforms of something like the bureaucracy. We need reforms of the judiciary. These are governance reforms. I wrote a book called India Grows at Night, when the government sleeps. Well, when the government sleeps, they took out that part of the title because the publishers thought that was a bit too insulting. But India Grows at Night was about these reforms. And I think those are equally important for us to do. So that's kind of where we are.
So to return to the Gita, millions of people use it as a kind of rough guide in negotiating the dilemmas of life, especially the ethical dilemmas. But in India, it's also being used by management consultants as a kind of strategic guide for boardrooms, for planning, and so on. Is it underutilized in that role, do you think?
Well, look, but first let me give you my definition of a management guru, the kinds who are using this. For me, guru stands for good at understanding, GU, but relatively useless, RU, guru. Now, what I don't mean to make fun of these guys, but I mean, I'm also thought of sometimes as one of those, and I have to remind them about my definition of the guru. These are, in a way, management self-help books. And because of the iconic status of the Gita, it's a very good way to grab eyeballs. Use the word Gita, the Bhagavad Gita in India, and you are talking about magic. You're talking about a country where 80% of the people are Hindu, and for most of them, the Gita is like the Bible, and so it has a religious status. But of course, for someone like me, who is an agnostic, I will be looking at the Gita not as a believer. But of course, the nice thing about being a Hindu is that I can be an atheist and still be a respectable Hindu. And that is the wonderful quality that we talked about in the beginning of plurality, that India is a country not of one book, one prophet, one message. There's no such thing as heresy. We are an argumentative Indian. We discuss things. And the Hinduism is a way of life rather than a way of one single obligatory belief. And so it lends itself. Now, to answer your question, one of the most powerful messages in the Gita is the message that if you act for the sake of the action and not for the personal rewards that the action will bring you, if you act in such a way that you don't care who gets the credit, that is somehow a dharmic way, a purer way to act. And that action is not only going to bring you happiness, it will also make you better at what you're doing. Because if you're focusing on the action, if you're focusing on what's to be done, and all your attention is at that moment on that, rather than thinking, oh my God, if I do this, will it get me a promotion or not? Am I wasting my time? Now that is how the corporate executive behaves. He's always thinking of his next promotion. It's careerism, bureaucracy. And so I think if a CEO today had employees, had his top management team thinking like this, he would love it, or she would love it. It would be a dream team of people who really cared for their work. This idea in the Gita is called Nishkam Karma or Karma Yoga. The practice of Karma Yoga is the practice. And of course, it has other benefits, spiritual benefits as well. It has benefits to happiness as well, that if you're acting, if you're chopping the wood and fetching the water for that moment, and you're enjoying doing that, or whatever you're doing, you're so totally absorbed, my God, that you forget yourself. That's making a life. How many people spend their lives searching for that sense of purpose? I feel I know too many friends who wake up, who are now retired from working, and many of them old colleagues from my company. And the only question they have in the morning is, what shall I do today? And this, if you live in this way, then you don't have to ask that question. And what shall I do today? And you have a sense of purpose. And I do believe personally that you create your purpose. There's no sort of God-given purpose that each human being has. And most of us kind of stumble through it. I stumbled, I had an academic career at one point. I was going to do engineering. Then I had a career as a philosopher. And then I quit that, became a business person, career as business. Then I became a writer. And you know something? Now I spent 25 to 30 years in business world, 25 to 30 years as a writer. So half. And what have I learned? I've learned one thing, that businessmen get a bad rap in life. Actually, I find that the more I think about it, or more I think about myself as a business person and myself now as a writer, I think I was a better person as a business person. And why? The reason is that business people they instantly understand interdependence. And they depend on others to get things done. For example, they have customers. And you have to satisfy your customer. And so they learn, you have to, if you are a big customer comes, and you have to bow down to your customer. Even Mr. Tata bows down to his customers. And And similarly, you have suppliers. You have to be fair to your suppliers. Every businessman wants to squeeze the supplier a little bit harder to get a better deal. Well, if you squeeze him or her too hard, you'll get a defective component and you'll get hurt because the person won't be able to make it in the price that you're giving him. Third, you have employees. You can't do everything yourself. So you have to respect your employees. If you fill your company with nephews, and all these graduates from business school will say, what the hell am I doing here? Those guys are going to go to the top anyway. So you have to learn to respect people. And that's the heart of morality. Goodness lies in that respect. And as a writer, Pratik, I don't need anyone. I'm writing away, and I'll give you one instance of how I feel I've not become a better person. I mean, you'd think that I would have learned by now that I'm so busy as a writer, a successful writer, my books are selling, I don't need publishers, I don't need anyone. And I should just be happy writing books. But no, I went to Khan Market the other day, the big shop, Bahari and Sons in Delhi. And I had a new book out. There were reviews appearing. And I looked at the window and he didn't have a copy of my book. I went charging in and I told Bahari, hey, don't you know I'm a best-selling writer and you don't have my book in your window? So he goes and places it at one side. I said, no, put it in the center. You see, vanity does not go away, no matter where. And so I may talk about nishkam karma, diminishing your ego, not caring about, all these intellectually, I've understood that it's important to shrink your ego, but it's a work in progress, all I can say.
Gurcharan, thank you very much for a very, very illuminating conversation. And we look forward to both your books, the AI-assisted one and the human-written one, as guides to a better life for everyone. Thank you very much.